Hello, and thank you for joining us again at Voice of Rohingya Radio. We are a registered nonprofit coming to you from the state of Oregon in the United States of America. I would like to take some time to thank all of our listeners who allow this program to continue providing the latest news through our exclusive interviews, reports from inside the border, and reputable sources from around the world. If you would like to stay up to date with our program, you can find our weekly broadcasts every Sunday night at 6 p.m. Pacific online at youtube.com/VOR radio, or you can join our page on Facebook to find more information on our activities and past programs. It is October 26th, 2014. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, I am your host, Zach Taylor. Our top story today comes as a growing sense of desperation is fueling a mass exodus of Rohingya, with the number who have fled by boat now topping 100,000, a leading expert said Sunday. Chris Lua, director of the nonprofit advocacy group Arakan Project, says there has been a huge surge since October 15th, with an average of 900 people per day piling into cargo ships parked off Rakhine State. That's nearly 10,000 in less than 2 weeks, she noted, one of the biggest spikes yet. Lua, who has teams monitoring embarkation points, is considered the leading authority on the number of fleeing Rohingya. But boats are now shoving off from the shore more and more places, she said, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to keep track of how many are leaving. Lua said the real number may be much higher, saying some Rohingya families have received phone calls notifying them that ships from the latest exodus have started arriving in neighboring Thailand, where passengers are often brought to jungle camps facing extortions and beatings until relatives come up with enough money to win their release. From there, they usually travel to Malaysia or other countries, but still stateless, their future remains bleak. Recently, dozens of Rohingya men were detained for having alleged ties to the militant Rohingya Solidarity Organization, said King Maung Win, a resident from Maung Da Township, adding that several reportedly were beaten or tortured during their arrests or while in detention. Lua said 3 of the men died. Our team is becoming more and more convinced that this campaign of arbitrary arrests is aimed at triggering departures, she said. Rakhine State spokesman Wen Yang denied any knowledge of arrests or abuse. There is nothing happening up there, he said. There are no arrests of suspects of RSO. I haven't heard anything like that. Every year, the festival of Eid al-Allah, which was celebrated by Muslims worldwide earlier this month, marks the beginning of a large exodus of Rohingya, in part due to calmer seas, but also because it is a chance to spend time with family and friends. But there seems to be a growing sense of desperation this year, with numbers nearly double that from the same period in 2013. Lua said a number of Rohingya also were moving overland to Bangladesh and on to India and Nepal. In other news, the European Union has refused to back away from plans to submit a resolution to the United Nations General Assembly on Myanmar's human rights record, despite President U Thein Sein's insistence that they are no longer needed. During a speech in Milan on October 17th, the president said that Myanmar had made considerable progress in human rights protection, but the international community has not recognized the progress enough. He urged the European Union to stop submitting resolutions on Myanmar's human rights situation to the Assembly's Third Committee and said Myanmar was taking measures to sign human rights conventions, trade union conventions, and conventions on women and children. The speech was the most public appeal yet for an end to the rights resolution, which has been an annual ritual since 1991. However, the European Union Embassy in Rangoon told the Myanmar Times last week that the resolution would be submitted this year as planned. In light of outstanding human rights challenges, the EU and other co-sponsors will again table a resolution on Myanmar, said Colin Steinbach, the head of the embassy's political, press, and information section. Discussions are ongoing in New York at the moment, and there is good cooperation with Myanmar. He did not say when the resolution would be submitted, but in previous years it has been tabled in November and approved in December. President Thein Sein's comments came just days before the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Myanmar, Yang Hee Lee, was due to formally submit her first country report to the UN General Assembly. Mark Farmaner, the director of Burma Campaign UK, said that, quote, the government is hoping that if it can stop the resolutions, it can stop these reports, and that rather than end human rights abuses, it is trying to cover them up. Some European countries have challenged the Myanmar authorities to prove the claim that Rohingya do not exist in Myanmar by providing strong evidence, according to the Rakhine State Chief Minister U Maung Maung On. The minister raised the issue during an October 22nd press conference held at the Rakhine State Government Office on the subject of the recent Asia-Europe meeting held in Italy that was attended by Myanmar's president. Myanmar has come under fire over its handling of Rohingya in Rakhine State, who the government refers to as Bengalis, claiming they are illegal immigrants. Maung Maung On said these European governments suggested that the Myanmar central government should publish a book to prove that Rohingya do not exist in the Rakhine State. There are some books published by some countries which claim that Rohingya exist, but there is no book saying Rohingya do not exist, so the government should publish a book and give strong evidence, they said. Although no officially sanctioned book has been published to dispute the Rohingya claims to citizenship, Dr. Ai Chan, professor of Southeast Asian Studies, published a book referring to Rohingya as viruses that has been highly contested by international history scholars. You are listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio. Thanks again for tuning in to Voice of Rohingya Radio, a registered non-profit from the state of Oregon in the United States of America, bringing you English language news concerning the Rohingya people of Myanmar. I'm your host, Zach Taylor. The Myanmar Border Guard Police have been arresting Rohingya since last month and accusing them of communicating with a rebel group. Many Rohingya were arrested and tortured to death by Myanmar Border Guard Police. In some reports by local activists, private parts of men were cut off and other organs were removed. On October 23rd, Myanmar Border Guard Police and about 30 Rakhine men came into Nari Bil village and raided the houses there. One man was tortured to death and thrown into a stream near Amina Bazaar. His body was found by villagers in the stream at 6:30 a.m. on the following day. Myanmar BGP police have been committing crimes against humanity since the time that they received authorization from the central government as to replace Nasika. According to the local residents, many innocents have been arrested in the name of communicating with the rebel group Rohingya Solidarity Organization, although the organization has been disbanded and there are no credible reports of armed activities for the last 2 decades. It seems the Myanmar government is using the organization's name to persecute Rohingyas. In Thi Chong village of Mongda Township, more than 100 military men searched and destroyed 3 houses and 1 Rohingya shop over the allegation that some RSO members entered the place to take shelter on October 21st. They also destroyed the shop of Maulana Yusuf, which was established at Balu Kali Market, and looted goods from the shop. The military also reportedly beat a woman for not opening her door. The owners of the 3 houses fled the scene to avoid arrest and torture, a close relative of a victim said. According to the villagers, the village administration officer, accompanied by 5 others, gave misinformation to the military about RSO personnel staying in the village as a means of targeting the houses due to previous enmity. Villagers are saying the village admin officer purposefully gave misinformation to the authorities so they would harass and destroy families who were against him. In other news, an influential Washington think tank is criticizing Myanmar government for presiding over a humanitarian catastrophe in western Rakhine State and doing little to track down perpetrators of Buddhist on Muslim violence around the country. Those criticisms come in an assessment by the Center for Strategic and International Studies of the situation in Myanmar 3 years after it began a historic transition to democracy. The centrist think tank, which has the ear of the Obama administration, visited Myanmar in August and issued its report Wednesday. President Barack Obama, who counts U.S. support of the Southeast Asian nation's reforms as a foreign policy success, will make his second visit to Myanmar in 2 years when it hosts a summit of regional leaders in November. The report says power is deeply skewed in favor of the military, and the decision-making on key political reforms has stalled. It is not yet clear that the military's overwhelming dominance will diminish significantly as the current government approaches the end of its formal tenure in April 2016, the think tank said. The report says massive human suffering continues for Rohingya, adding that for months the Myanmar government has abdicated its leadership responsibilities as worsening violence drove international humanitarian groups out. The government's action plan to address the situation in Rakhine, criticized by human rights groups as discriminatory, puts forward ideas for peaceful coexistence, citizenship, and resettlement, but it remains to be seen if the government can defuse the crisis, the report says. In the past 3 years, the United States has led the charge as Western nations have re-engaged with Myanmar and rolled back sanctions, and Wednesday's report advocates continuing American engagement despite congressional concerns over Myanmar backsliding on reforms. The report calls for the U.S. to double health aid to Myanmar, including in the fight against drug-resistant malaria, and to sustain limited U.S. engagement with the military. It says, however, those ties shouldn't be expanded before it's clear the military hasn't intervened in the elections. The Arakan Rohingya Union recently officially welcomed United Nations Special Rapporteur on Myanmar Yang Hee Lee's report on the situation of human rights in the country. In their press release of the report, the ARU urgently appealed to the Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon and the members of the global community of nations to abide by the international rule of law and permanently cease hostility towards Rohingya and to observe the following demands: to provide adequate basic services, investigate and prosecute those responsible for human rights violations, and to respect Rohingyas as well as other minorities' rights to self-identify. The ARU also requested that NGO staff members be immediately released from imprisonment, to address long-standing socio-economic development challenges in Rakhine, and to develop reconciliation measures as a necessary step to rebuild integrated communities for the inclusion in the so-called Rakhine State Action Plan. Thanks again for listening to Voice of Rohingya Radio, a weekly news program bringing you up-to-date information about the Rohingya people in Myanmar. You can catch our broadcasts every Sunday at 6 p.m. Pacific Time here in the United States at youtube.com/VORradio, or you can join our page on Facebook to find more information on the program. For Voice of Rohingya Radio, this is Zach Taylor, signing out.